Greetings, scholars. Hope you remember me. I'm Mr. Israel. I'm the instructional specialist for history and social science for RPS. I did a video for you a couple weeks back reviewing with you the foundation of history and social science. And today I'm back with an exciting video I hope you really enjoy. But the first thing is I need to get my phone and get the timer out because we want to be good stewards of time today. If it's okay with you, I'm going to share my screen. All right. And we'll get started. Now, this is grade 7, the Understanding Us series, where we're going to take that weekly dive into historical skills and thinking, okay? So let's take a look at the skill focus for today, all right? We're going to be looking at the following skills: map skills and image interpretation. We're going to be looking at primary sources and drawing conclusions along with understanding community. So these are the areas that we really want to focus on today in our lesson called Edward Curtis, Cultural Bias and Getting to the Truth. And that's what we want to do, is get to the truth. But the first thing I want to ask is, how have you been? Are you doing all right? What have you been up to? Maybe some indoor basketball, a little reading, maybe looking at some of the RPS videos for other content areas, playing some video games, and getting together with maybe other small members of family. I hope that you've been doing all right. I'm feeling pretty good myself. Thanks for asking. Now, are you ready? Because I can't do this without you. So you're going to need these items. I need you to get a pen or pencil and your notebook. And if you're ready and you've got all of that, let's go. Now, remember, I always start with vocabulary. I really believe that vocabulary enhances our understanding of everything. You know, a lot of times we hear words, we don't even know what they mean, and we just sort of keep it moving. But we always want to place an emphasis and focus on vocabulary. Learn at least 1 or 2 words a week. Remember, sometimes hearing unfamiliar vocabulary can be like hearing a foreign language, right? Like, do you know what bumfuzzle means? Look it up. Look it up. It pays to know. All right, so you're going to get 2 words today, and remember that words matter. And here are the 2 words. The first word is cultural bias. I want you to try it out, okay? Cultural bias, cultural bias. Now, what is cultural bias? Cultural bias can be defined as the judging of people and ideas by one's own experiences or culture, right? Judging people and ideas by one's own experiences or culture. What's an example of that? Let's say that you come from a culture where the longer a man's hair is, the stronger he is, right? So only the strongest men in your community wear the longest hair. Let's say that that was the case. But let's say that you go and you visit a Tibetan monastery, right? You know, or let's say you visit a Buddhist temple where it's customary for men to shave their heads, and you get there and you say, oh, their hairs, they don't even have any hair, so they must all be weak. They can't be strong, because in my culture, men who are strong have long hair. Do you see that? That's an example of cultural bias. And it's dangerous because we don't want to judge other people's culture based upon our own perception or experiences. The way that you overcome cultural bias is by actually learning more about other people and their ways of life, okay? Now, our second word is indigenous. I want you to try it out, okay? Indigenous, indigenous, all right? Now, what is indigenous? What does that mean? Indigenous means original to a particular region or environment, okay? Original to a particular region or environment. That's what indigenous means. That can refer to people, that can refer to plants, etc. Anything that's original to a particular region or environment, okay? Now, cultural bias. Remember, you're not the same as me, so somehow something's wrong with you. We don't want to do that. We don't want to judge people that way. We want to learn as much about other people and cultures as we can. That's what makes world community, right? That allows us to get along with other people and understand people. And in times like this, we really need to have a better understanding of people. You agree? Now, indigenous means what? That which is original to a particular area. And here's a picture of some Native American children, because remember, Native Americans are the indigenous people to America. So those are your two words, cultural bias and indigenous. Doing pretty good on time so far. Now, it's time to do some history. Let's go. Now, take a look at this dude. He looks pretty, cool, right? I mean, that hat and the whole nine, the facial hair piece. I mean, he looks like a pretty cool cat. His name is Edward Sheriff Curtis, Edward S. Curtis. He was born in 1868. He died in 1952. Now, he was a photographer. We all pretty much know what a photographer is, right? Someone who takes pictures, images. But he was also an ethnologist. And remember, when you see ology at the end of a word, biology, chronology, it means the study of something. So an ethnologist is a person who studies or analyzes the characteristics of different people. You go out and you say, oh, well, people from this culture, they eat this, or they dress this way, or they look this way. That's an ethnologist, okay? And that's going to be very important to what we're talking about today. Now, take a look at the Smithsonian. Smithsonian Magazine says Edward Curtis's epic project to photograph Native Americans, his 20-volume masterwork, was hailed as, quote, the most ambitious enterprise in publishing since the production of the King James Bible. That's pretty significant, man. I mean, for somebody to have created a 20-volume masterwork like that, I mean, do you agree that that's pretty significant? All right, so let's talk about Edward Curtis a little bit. As a photographer and ethnologist, he chose to study what they called the American Indian, right? Or Native Americans or indigenous people. And here you'll see, if you can follow my mouse, you'll see where he traveled to, all right? So he comes all the way from the East Coast, and he travels even up north near Canada. He travels towards the west. Take a look right here. This what's called Pekin, properly Pekin. This is very important for our study today, so make sure that you notice where that is, okay? Now, this is a map that was created by Eric Elias that detailed the travels of Curtis. He wanted to know as much about Native American people as possible, and during this time was the westward expansion. So he was going out, checking out lands, territories, and learning more about Native people. Now, just a brief review. Do you remember your cardinal directions? Do you? I'm bringing one up down here. Look at the bottom left corner of your map. Remember your cardinal directions, right? Because you can divide a map into 4 parts. North is at the top, south is at the bottom. What's over here? Correct. East. And then what's here? Correct. West. But then what's in between those? And that's where you need to go back to get those cardinal directions. Now, can you find Kansas City in the Midwest? Remember, if we've divided into 4s, and this half over here is the West, this is the East, where would the Midwest be? See if you can find Kansas City. That's something I want you to work on when the video's over. You can run this back and work on this yourself. Also remember, well, before you do that, can you find the native indigenous tribe that's directly north of the area of Kansas City? I want you to look for that as well. Now remember, a map can be a primary or secondary source. If it's a map that was drawn in the time period that we're studying, it's called a primary source. But if it's something that was done later, like this one, this was done years after Curtis, this is a secondary source, okay? So Curtis traveled around to learn more about Native people, but the Smithsonian Magazine goes on, and take a look here. I mean, this is pretty significant. It says, a close look reveals how the famed photographer altered his glass negatives. That's the original part. We don't use glass negatives today, but the negatives are the things when you can ask your parents if they have any around the house. They're these little strips, right, that you can hold up to the light and almost see the image from the picture. This is way before your time, but your parents may have some negatives from a camera around the house. Ask them. But what he did was he altered his glass negatives, creating the popular image of Native Americans that still exists today. But my question is, is that a good thing? Like, why is he altering the images that he took? What's going on here? All right. So let's go ahead and let's check out what the Smithsonian says about Curtis. I'm about to play a little bit of the video. So let's go ahead and let's check out what they have to say. Pay attention.
Anyone who knows anything about photography has heard Curtis's name. Curtis is probably the most famous photographer of North American Indians in the last part of the 19th century, early 20th century. He's someone who's known for his particular style of ethnographic romanticism. He was born in Whitewater, Wisconsin. A couple of years after that, his family moved to Cordova, Minnesota. And at the age of 17, his family moved to Seattle, Washington. He encountered the daughter of Chief Seattle in Washington. She at the time was 95 or 96 years old. So this was his first Native American subject. So it's these early contacts as a young man with Native people that really crystallizes his interest in Native Americans. And it's out of that the major work evolves, which is the opus, The North American Indian, a 20-volume set that is funded by John Pierpont Morgan.
Our recent acquisition consists of over 700 negatives and positives, mostly original negatives. Almost the entire set of negatives that we received relate to his North American Indian work. What's significant about the negatives is that they're extremely rare, and the negatives are the original object. The negative is the thing that's put in the camera. The negative is the thing that was actually there. And very few of these have survived. The glass negative is the format that was used prior to film negatives. So the emulsion would be put on the glass. In very early times of the glass negative, the photographer would actually have to prepare the emulsion right on the spot and develop the photograph right on the spot. Curtis used what's called dry plate negatives, which already came prepared to go right in the camera. He also used nitrate, which is the earliest form of film negative, and we have quite a few of those as well. Among his photographs are both portraits, which are clearly staged portraits, like a studio kind of setting. And then there are pictures that he took of events or activities out in the field. And some are probably, he said, wait a minute, hold that pose for a second. I mean, something like that. And then there were the cases where he had them reenact. One of the things very interesting about the negatives is you can see how these images were manipulated from the sort of the raw negative to adding things or taking things away. Occasionally there'd be something in the photograph, like one famous example is there's an alarm clock in the photograph, and he didn't want that. Everything else in the photo was, didn't show any signs of sort of Western approaches, and so that was carefully, or not so carefully, it's kind of obvious that there's something done in that photo. And some the negatives that we have, you can see that umbrellas were removed, from the photos.
As you know, we tend to think of photographs as representing reality or some essential truth. So why not photograph subjects with these markers of change about them? What makes them any less native or any less Indian if they're wearing a Mackinaw shirt and not, a leather garment? It's interesting that among Native Americans, even to the present, Curtis's work has a very strong resonance because he ennobles them. His depictions, his representations of them are ennobling.
Listen closely, and think about and reflect on what you heard. So take a look at this image. Remember that from the video? Do you notice anything here besides Little Plume? This is Little Plume right here, and this is his son, Yellow Kidney. I know, strange names to us, but these names carry significance for that particular time period. Might want to look into that a little bit more. But do you notice anything here? Remember what you just watched. Let's take a look at another angle of the photo in the same area. Do you see what's circled there? It's a clock. Now, take a look at the final image. when Curtis produced his final work, right, a part of that 20-volume set that we talked about earlier, he removed the clock from the picture. Now, you notice that's missing, right? Okay, so question, how would you explain why Edward Curtis altered the photograph before publishing it? What's the point? Why would you just erase a clock? What's the point of that? Now, there's some considerations when you're examining photography. I'm going to leave them on the screen for you to look at real quick. First, when you're evaluating whether a historical photograph is useful as evidence, historians consider various questions. When and where was the photograph taken? Okay. Who took the photograph? What was their perspective on the events or people being photographed? And how might that have influenced what they chose to shoot? Why was the photograph taken? Might the photographer have wanted to portray a scene in a particular way? Under what circumstances was the photograph taken? How might these circumstances have limited or enabled what the photographer captured? And lastly, what technology did the photographer use, and how might that have influenced the image created? These are the things, and you can run the video back to see these again. When you're looking at historical imagery, these are very important pieces. Now watch this, okay? We're gonna play a game. I'm gonna show you some pictures, and you tell me if they portray what they seem. If the image that I put up, right, and the explanation is correct, give me a thumbs up, all right? So let me stop sharing real quick because I want you to see my face. If it's good, give me a thumbs up. If it's not correct, give me a thumbs down. You got that? I want to make sure that we're clear on that right now. Okay. So let's go ahead and let's get started. Here's the first image. Is this a UFO? Yes or no? No, actually, it's a car door, right? It's a car door after some rain and snow, right? You see, this is the handle. It's not a UFO. So it's a photograph. The photograph is real, but it's not portraying the reality. The answer is no. Thumbs down. All right. Is this an aerial view of a city? I want you to look at this closely. You know, you get an aerial view from way up high and you see all of the buildings there, right? Is this an aerial view of a city? Actually, it's a close-up on some wood bark. The answer is no. All right, what about this one? Is it a mysterious island in the ocean? Look at that. That looks like some great place to be. Is that what it is? The answer is, thumbs down, no. You know, it's actually a rock in a puddle. You see that? It's a rock in a puddle. I jumped ahead. Now this one right here got me a little hungry. All right, so is this a tasty pastry, right? Is this a tasty pastry? Answer is no, it's just a rock. All right, last one. Is this inside an awesome new apartment? Look at how it's some kind of loft, right? That's gotta be the case. In all actuality, it's the inside of a guitar. You see the hole right there, right below the strings? The answer is no. Did you pass the quiz? All right, let's get back now. Let's examine this because we're running close on time. All right, so you see the clock was there in the original photo, right? But now you see that the clock was altered. So when he finally put the book out, he erased the clock from the original negatives. Why would he do this? Why? Okay, 3 things to consider. Number 1, at the time, many Americans argued that it was okay to take Indian, or more properly Native American land, because it was believed that they did not understand modern technology and would therefore not make good use of the land. You got to understand that, okay? Another thing is that clocks were not the only way to tell time. It was also possible to tell time by observing the position of the sun in the sky. You ever seen one of these, like a sun disk? So that's another fact that we want to consider. And then thirdly, in the foreword to the book that Curtis puts out, where this photograph is, President Theodore Roosevelt, the President of the United States during the time, actually says, Mr. Curtis, in him, we both have an artist and a trained observer whose work has far more than mere accuracy because it is truthful. So these 3 things are things we have to consider First of all, do we believe Mr. Roosevelt? Second of all, what does, observing time by sundials, what does that have to do with anything? We got to consider these three things, okay? Look at this image. This is an image by John Gast from 1872. It's a famous image about westward expansion. It's called American Progress. And you see that this angel is like moving people to the west. You see here native people are like running for their lives. The buffaloes are running for their lives as Americans are spreading into the west. Manifest destiny, as you learned earlier in the year, was the belief that America was meant by God to expand. And because many people in America, not everyone, held this belief, then there had to be supports for this, right? There had to be a reason why we would move into territories that were already inhabited by other people and take those territories away. So now go back here. The reason, look at this. The clock it represents technology. The original clock was created by an African-American man named Benjamin Banneker in the late 1700s, but it was only after 1851 that the clocks began to come out more and become more popular. This image was taken in 1910. And by this time, many people in the West didn't have clocks. And for Native Americans to have this kind of technology, right, it would show that they were not just an old group of people unwilling to change, that needed to be removed because, they would make no good use of the land. They're sort of primitive. Some people even said they were savages. So you don't feel as bad about taking land from people that you don't think are stepping up to modern times. So when Curtis puts out his book that's going to give this image of Native American people, he has that removed, because for people to see a piece of technology like that would mean that Native Americans understood time. They understood technology. They had access to it and a use for it. Then that would blow the whole idea that they were primitive, savage people whose land we should take because they weren't doing anything with it anyway, okay? So let's review, okay? First of all, vocab words, skills, and concepts. Cultural bias and indigenous. Remember those two words. Cultural bias refers to thinking someone else is different or bad because they're different than your own culture. And that's the way that many Americans during this time period portrayed Native people and thought of Native people. And that's why Curtis actually removed the clock from the image. And remember, Native people are indigenous, which means they were here before Columbus. They were here before any of the first English colonies or any of that. Remember, they are the original people to this space and place. And we need to understand more about them. Remember your general map skills. Go back and work on that, okay? And remember, we draw conclusions from evidence. Things aren't always what they seem. So as historians, we have to always dig deeper. Don't just say, oh, that's a picture of Little Plume and Yellow Kidney and there's no clock there, it's all good. Dig deeper, okay? Remember that. Now here's your mission for Thursday. First, I want you to examine the images from the Edward Curtis collection, Library of Congress, and consider what these images tell you about Native people of that time, okay? Then I want you to review the definition of cultural bias and write down 4 things you would like to know more about in Native American culture. Maybe their dress, their music, their food. And research these 4 things you wonder about by taking a virtual tour through the National Museum of American Indian, the National Park Service site, and also the federally recognized tribe resource site, okay? And I put those in the lesson plans for you and your parents. You can search these sites or others which parents allow as appropriate to find out more about Native people from the past. I thank you so much for being with me today. I've enjoyed myself, and hopefully see you again. Remember, things are not always what they seem. As historians, we always go deeper. Until next time, peace.